Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming today to the World Communications Forum Masterclasses. Just to let you know, we are doing masterclasses every month, and we have prominent speakers, participants, presenters, all the time, every month. We have absolutely interesting persons to share their thoughts with us. Today we have 5 of them. And the lead, of course, is Hernandez-Blades, who is amazing professional. As I said earlier, talking to Bradley, that she's a great personality, great friend, but also great professional. With more than 25 years in the global communications business, today she's an independent board director, although I don't know whether it exists at all to be independent, because we depend on everything happening in our life, And also, I know that Catherine depends very much on the real professionalism, on the involvement of the interesting projects. And also, she's serving today on the boards of Core Civic and the RepTac, recently, company and operating partner of Periscope Equity. We know it, Catherine, since many years ago, when she was the public global PR director of Lockheed Martin, a small company producing, fighters. And the more, unfortunately, we observe wars all over the world, especially next to my borders. We are located in Sofia, Bulgaria at the moment. The more fighters is producing Lockheed Martin. But again, unfortunately, but it's a very big company with amazing corporate rules and corporate standards. Catherine was included in the Forbes Top 50 most influential global CMOs list. And also, she was inducted in the Women in Communications Hall of Fame and had only two, I'm very disappointed, Cannes Lions awards for public relations. But she, trust me, she has all the awards from Davos Communications Summit and also from the World Communications Forum. We met with Catherine in Davos Summit, I think, was it Geneva or Davos? It doesn't matter. Maybe 10 years ago. And since then, she is a really very big fan of our project. Just to make a note that World Communications Forum exists for almost 16 years already. And since then, we are doing summits every year. Next year will be in April in Switzerland again, April 23rd, 24th. If you like Catherine's presentation, subscribe to our summit next April, and you will have a chance to see not only Catherine, but also Andrea, but also Chetna, of course, Jessica, who is our executive director, Raya, and the rest. You will see them in personality. With those words, I would like to thank Hernandez-Blades to joining us today, and give her the floor.
Thank you, Maxim, and thank all of you for joining us today. I am joining you from New Orleans, Louisiana in the USA, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share some slides, and hopefully the technology piece is going to be working for us. There we are. I might not be as pretty as it needs to be, but hopefully you can see it. Again, thank you for joining us. And if you take nothing else away from the next hour, let it be this: your CEO's love language is math. And while that's the language they speak, they are focused on outcomes, and they are creatures of data. And we're going to talk about how we can better have those conversations so that we can get the credit we deserve for all the good work we're doing. The quarter-to-quarter grind escapes no company, but your CEO is graded on his or her TSR, which is total shareholder return. We'll be using terms like that throughout the presentation to help you acclimate to their voice. But simply put, we're going to spend the next hour talking about how to quantify the traditionally unquantifiable. We're also going to spotlight a few hot topics. And our first one is the discussion around ESG, or environmental, social, and governance. Globally, we're seeing some companies retract on this, but we have two experts here from Ethisphere that I'll introduce in a second that are going to deep dive into what the future actually looks like. And as we go through the agenda, we're also going to talk about using data and modeling to be able to tell a compelling story in the C-suite in a language they understand. I have hot topic Tina, because Tina McCorkindale will also be joining us, and she is going to talk about a number of things, from generative AI to the importance of trust and metrics that matter. But before she joins us, we'll also hear from Brad from RepTrack, and he's going to talk about your newest stakeholder, which is generative AI. You cannot have a class in this day and age without talking about generative AI. So without further ado, we'll start with Tim Erblich and Erica Salmon-Byrne. Tim is the longtime CEO of Ethisphere, and his visionary leadership taught corporations around the world that doing good is good for business by using quantifiable metrics on something that was previously not very quantifiable. He also created the world's most ethical companies list to ensure that those companies who are doing good get the credit that they deserve. And joining him today is Erica Salmon-Byrne. She is the Chief Strategy Officer and Executive Chair of Ethisphere. She is also Chair of the Business Ethics Leadership Alliance. And they're going to share their thoughts again on the future of ESG. And I will drive the slides. Erica and Tim, you have the floor. Just tell me when to switch.
Hi, everybody. This is Tim Erblich. I am coming to you from Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm delighted to be here. A couple things that you mentioned that Erica and I will spend a bit of time on is quantifying the unquantifiable, which is really what we set out to do, Erica, and also focusing very much on total shareholder return. So with that in mind, if you would go to the next slide, Catherine, we can talk a little bit about data. And Erica, jump in at any time. So to quantifying the unquantifiable, we are nearing our 20th anniversary of something we do called the world's most ethical companies. Interestingly enough, it's a data exercise where we measure companies against a variety of different criteria. And it's interesting when we talk about ESG, I think, Erica, we're going on our 20th year of doing this. And so it's something, what is the future of ESG? If you look to the past, I think what you'll find is the best companies always cared about the communities in which they operated.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why they did that is, well, it's the right thing to do. And when you do the right thing, you attract and retain the best employees, but it's also good business. And so the data here is something, and Erica, catch me if I misspeak at all. Every year when we do the world's most ethical companies, I think last year there was about 135 companies recognized from 23 countries, 40 or 50 different industries. And what we do is we take those companies that are publicly traded on some exchange around the world, and we put them into a basket, and we look at their total shareholder return versus they're generally large cap companies versus an index that an outside provider creates for us of large cap companies. And this is a 5-year look at it, and it's outperformed the index by, I think, Erica, the latest delta was something like 22%.
The
And
2024 delta was actually a little bit closer to 7, as a reflection of some of the changes that we've seen in the market over the course of the last several years. But Tim, I think the point to emphasize for the crew here is every single year we've done this calculation, the companies on the world's most ethical companies list have outperformed. That's the bottom line, right? There's been outperformance every single year. And the thing that I think for you all to think about is, what does that mean about the business case when you're talking to your C-suite about things like ESG or things like reputation, which Brad's going to talk about in a minute. All of these go to underpin something that C-suite executives increasingly have to care about, which is how do we protect our intangible assets? Because 70% of the average company's value at this point is tied up in intangible assets. And you can't write an insurance policy for an intangible asset. You can't hire a security guard for an intangible asset. You can't put a lock on an intangible asset. Your best defense against your intangible assets being compromised is your people. And it's part of the reason why quantifying that story and talking about the way in which the softer things that companies tend to have a harder time focusing on actually are a financial return. So when Tim and I get asked what is the underpinning reason for the outperformance, a big piece of the answer is the amount of your company's value that is tied up in intangible assets.
Catherine, if you go to the next slide, what I thought I'd do is when you reached out to me and said, ESG, especially in America, is getting a bit of backlash. What are companies doing and what is the future? I thought I'd just give you 4 or 5 examples that have come into my world. There is an amazing company called 12, and what they do is they make air fuel that has no carbon impact, and I urge all of you to check it out. But in terms of what we think about with Ethisphere is how does it impact total shareholder return, or how does it impact companies? 12 just signed a contract with the parent of British Airways to use their fuel in all their planes. So British Airways is not doing that because they're an NGO. They're doing that because it makes really strong business sense. I live in Arizona. Just as recent as last week, Rob Walton gave $115 million to establish the School of Conservative Futures, which I'm pretty close to what's going on there. And it's really about the principles of ESG. If you look at somebody like Microsoft, they're not backing off their climate goal. I know you're all communicators, so you probably know Catherine's good friend Ray Day. About this is just a little piece earlier this year, as DEI sort of came under attack in America, at least. Ray and the board of PRSA looked at it and said, do we need to change how we talk about what's important to us as communicators? And their board agreed unanimously that their values haven't changed. So one of the things Eric and I always touch upon is the importance of not rules-based leadership, but values-based leadership. Employees, investors, stakeholders, they need to be a part of your why. You need to connect with them, not in the short term, but in the long term. And it's fascinating to me that even as things come under attack, we see companies, and with the example of 12 or the ASU example or Microsoft examples, we actually see companies and their C-suite actually reinvesting in ESG. And the reason why is because it's smart business to have a diverse group of thinkers. It's smart business to treat your employees and your environment well. And these are just a couple other recent examples. One other thing before I throw it back to Erica, I'm chairman of a company called Beleaf Medical in the Midwest, and we just completed a pretty difficult refinancing. One of the pieces of the refinancing was an ESG audit by our outside financial institutions. So we see things like that still happening all the time. And again, if you look at these recent examples, I think you'll see ESG continue to be important. You might, and Erica can touch on this, you might see it called something differently. And as communicators, you need to think about how you meld the data that helps your company and your CEO and your board outperform and what you speak about internally. But the underpinnings of it aren't going away. So Erica, I'll throw it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Tim. And Catherine, if we would go to the next slide, I just want to particularly dive in on a couple of pieces related to A, that business case for doing business the right way, and B, some of the reasons that we think ESG isn't going anywhere. So it's not flashy. I am talking to a group of communicators. If any of you have a better idea for how to phrase this, please send it my way, because I have been struggling with this one for the last 5 years. All ESG is, at the end of the day, is a way of bucketing your material non-financial risk factors. That's all it is, right? That's all it is. It's basically a way of trying to figure out, what is our exposure to climate change? What is our exposure to shifts in consumer behavior? What is our exposure to shifts in the way that our employees think about whether or not they want to come to work for us? What is our exposure to changing regulatory guidance? What is our exposure to supply chain disruptions? That's what ESG is. ESG was a fun acronym. I agree with Tim. I think it's going to be called something else. But the things in those buckets are not going anywhere. And they're not going anywhere because they matter to businesses. Years ago, Larry Fink used the phrase social license to operate. And basically what he was getting at with that phrasing was this idea that companies are legal fictions. They can sue, they can be sued, they can buy things, they can sell things, but they can't actually do anything. The actual doing is done by people, or, well, soon to be maybe AI agents, but still entities, right, that are acting on behalf of the company. And we need, as business leaders, to think about what that reality means, and the ways in which that activity on the part of a company impacts the people that ultimately they need to buy their products. Because without a market, we don't sell things. And so the social license to operate is basically this agreement between the company and the people that are going to buy the products, build the products, work on the products, service the products, supply the products. And if that falls apart, either because of a loss of trust or because of a decline in reputation, the business falls apart. And there are so many examples of this that we have seen over the years. That part of the reason why we started the World's Most Ethical Companies list was to try to celebrate those companies that weren't. These are companies that are doing the right thing, and to get into, or to try to get into, a situation where we were giving those organizations talking points to talk to their leadership about the importance of doing business the right way. So there's 2 data points on this slide. There's a little wordy. There's 2 data points on this slide that I wanted to particularly highlight for this group. One is, we did some research with the team over at ASU, at the Governance Lab, looking at companies with strong culture scores. So this is, will your employees raise their hand when they see something? Are they comfortable speaking up? And what the research found was 4 companies that had scores that were 1 standard deviation above their benchmark, right? So just a little bit better than their benchmark. Those organizations saw, on average, a 40% higher return on assets. Tell me the C-suite or the finance person that doesn't want a 40% higher return on assets. You're not going to find it, right? The other one is, this is the slide that Tim was referencing at the beginning. This was this past year's, the 2025 5-year ethics premium, 7.8% outperformance when compared to the S&P 500. So again, strong indications that strong ethics is good business. And I believe that part of the reason for that is that first stat that I shared with you. When you have cultures where your employees are comfortable raising their hand, they admit they need help, they talk about a new product idea, they talk about a challenge they're having with a client, those are going to be better run businesses because you've unlocked the power of the brains of the people that you hired in the first place. So just a couple of takeaways, Catherine, because I know I want to make sure Brad has his time and Tina has her time as well. Values-based leadership is going to be your North Star as you navigate your way through all of these different challenges that are ahead of us. There's no indication we're going to live in less interesting times anytime soon. So really figuring out, how do you articulate your purpose to your audience in a way that is going to link the business you are in with the reason you get out of bed in the morning? That is going to be the thing that allows you to take care of the communities in which you operate. So preserving your social license to operate and attracting and retaining the best people is another, key piece of this. Because again, if we go back to that first slide, with 70% of your company's values being intangible, your people are going to be your best defense against something going wrong. Tim, I'll toss it back to you for any other last words.
No, Catherine and crew, I really applaud the work that you do. We've had a long relationship with some of the top communicators around the world, and these are interesting times. We hope the data we've shared a little bit around quantifying the unquantifiable, or the importance of sort of staying close to your employees and stakeholders, especially around culture, are important. And if anybody would like to sort of connect with us offline, I think Catherine has our contact information, but I just applaud the work you all do. And I think on behalf of myself, Erica, and the community of companies that represent Ethisphere, thanks for allowing us to join. So with that, Catherine, I'll throw it back to you.
Well, thank you so much for being here. That was amazing, and it was a great way to kick off our hour. So thank you. I know it's 6 a.m. where you are, so I really appreciate it, Tim and Erica. Just brilliant. I'm going to dive right in so we can keep going. I want to talk a little bit about maturity models, and so I would like you to ask yourself, how many of you are actually using one? And it's really, really important to be able to demonstrate to leadership that you are maturing the capabilities of your function. And that's what this is all about. So what you're looking at now is something that I borrowed from the University of California, Berkeley. And this is actually more around process maturity, but it gives you a nice visual before we go into a real example, which I will cover very, very quickly. I have always used a 5-point scale. It makes it easier for me. And I've always tied the work of the organization to the overall goals and objectives of the CEO of the organization. So let's talk about what that looks like in practice. And I'm going to go to the next slide. Say, for example, and by the way, I made this up, I would use between 5 and 7 objectives, but for the sake of time, we're going to cover 3, and we're going to talk about what a level 1 on the maturity model could look like and what a level 5 on the maturity model could look like. So all companies want to increase their stock price. So our company here, Company X, wants to do it 5% year over year. They want to improve sales by 7% year over year, and they want to reduce overhead by 3% year over year using generative AI solutions. We're going to hear a lot about that today. Again, you should have 5 pillars. We're only going to deal with 2 for the sake of time. So a level 1 on this scale, your organization should maintain a positive neutral to negative coverage of 60 to 40%. And you're doing that particularly in the financial media. So you're going to double click on financial because we're talking about how we're going to enhance the stock price, specifically in the investor and analyst community. Now, you'll notice I don't say we're going to increase the stock price by any percent. What I'm saying is we are going to do sentiment analysis on the media because I own the media. I don't own the stock price. I will always own the media relationships. So I am controlling my controllables. That's what I own. As far as improving sales, what I'm going to do there is to maintain a reputation score, which Brad is going to tell you about, of above 60 to support sales efforts. Why do I do that? Because I control the reputation. I don't control the conversion to the sale. When I was the CMCO of Aflac, I could generate leads. So I could, in the sales funnel, measure down to consideration. But there were tens of thousands of independent sales agents that were responsible for the conversion metric. So while my metric on my pay for performance outcomes had to do with consideration, the generation of those leads that I would then turn over to the sales team, sales would be responsible for the conversion metric. That would be on the sales director's pay for performance metrics. And then reduce overhead costs 3% year over year using generative AI. I put that in there because that way you own how you use generative AI before someone comes in and tells you how to do that. Now, what makes this maturity model different than just tracking yearly goals? And I'm so glad you asked, because I know you're all thinking about that. Remember, these are evergreen. The company's always going to want to raise the stock price. It's always going to want to improve their sales. It's always going to want to reduce overhead, because if you do all those things simultaneously, your speed to value is greater. And that TSR that we've been talking about, that total shareholder return for your CEO, happens at a higher level and a lot faster. So that's why we're doing what we're doing. And keep in mind that in order for your organization to move the needle from a level 1 to a 60-40 ratio on media sentiment to 95 to 5%, you're going to have to do some things differently. You're going to have to improve your digital and media performance, social and digital and mainstream. You're going to have to further develop one-on-one relationships with the media. And you're also going to have to play better defense to get to that 5% than that 40%, because bad news is still going to happen. So you have matured the skill set of your organization by measuring it this way. And at the end of the year, you can say, not just we did all of these things, but we enhanced the maturity of the organization by 1 point. And that is a much more powerful story, going from a 2 to a 3 or a 3 to a 4, than saying all of these individual little bits and pieces. And the outcomes should be your contribution to increased stock price, improvement of sales, and reducing overhead. And that's what gives the model longevity, because those are always substantial goals of your organization, because their goal is long-term sustainable growth. And these are the things that you can do to help them get there. So I'm going to skip over this now, but I am always available if you have any questions about this. I would highly suggest you get a thought partner outside of your organization when you're putting this together. Why? So you can be objective. And your thought partner, I will tell you, I've never met a CIO, a chief information security officer, or a CISO that didn't use this formula. And so that would be my first thought partner in my exercise internally into your organization, because the IT guys really know how to put these things together very readily. So I'm going to stop my share. I hope. Hold on. Okay, I'm gonna while I'm trying to figure that out, I'm going to introduce Brad Hecht from the RepTrack company. And in the interest of full disclosure, as Maxim said at the beginning, thank you. I'm going to stop sharing now. There we go. In the interest of full disclosure, I joined the RepTrack board of directors just a couple of months ago. But prior to that, I had used the platform for about a decade and a half. And it was highly valuable in my board meetings and my discussions with the C-suite. Brad has a long and distinguished career in data science with senior level professional experience at Gartner, at MIT, the Yankee Group, and Iconoculture before joining RepTrack. And I am so delighted he could make the time to be here. I think he's joining us from Boston, but I'm not sure. He can clarify. And if you want to share your screen, and we can get started. Thank you again, Brad, for being here.
Of course. And thank you, Catherine, for having me. And nice to meet everyone virtually. What I wanted to do today is talk through two things. And by the way, I could not have had a better setup than what Tim and Erica spoke about a little bit earlier. One of the things that senior communicators have sometimes as a challenge is how to quantify and prove the impact of the work that they do. So what I wanted to do first is just walk you quickly through an academically vetted and sort of a business proven measurement framework that helps you to do that. And then second, in what we all know is a multi-stakeholder world, I wanted to introduce you to a brand new stakeholder category that a lot of our clients have either asked us about, that they're trying to understand, or even figure out if they really need to care about it, that we've started to measure specifically around AI. And I'll use a quick case study example in order to take you through that. The first question is, and Erica, thank you for helping to set this up a little bit, is sort of to answer the question, why does reputation matter for corporate communicators? You don't have to take my word for it. And for those of you that have your speakers, you may want to turn up the volume a little bit here, but you don't have to take my word for it. Listen to Charlotte West, who's the head of global communications at Lenovo. So I'll just play this.
So I think when we started looking at measuring our reputation, it was really about saying, okay, we do all of these things, which are great, but how do we know that they're great and how do we know that they're making a difference? So I never felt that comms had something that they could hang their hat on and really walk into a boardroom in particular or the leadership team and say, like, we have driven this. We're not solely responsible for reputation. You know, it's every experience a customer has with a business. But I think we are the stewards of it and the ones that are driving it and always come with a reputation first mindset.
And I think her point is really important. Remember the term that she used, which is the boardroom, which is you need to be credible when you walk into the boardroom, into the executive leadership team, and be able to quantify the impact of the work that you do. The question is, how can you do that? And so let me just walk you through a high-level framework here to help you to try and understand not just how to quantify the work that you do, but also equally important, what's the impact of, as I think the Ethisphere team talked about, something that has historically been unquantifiable. So this is kind of the way we think about it in the real world and a way that you can think about quantifying this. And it starts in the middle of the page with what we call a reputation score. So that's a number. It's between 0 and 100. It's on a scale. And you heard a couple of minutes ago, Catherine talked about a 60 or higher. And so it's color coded. Red is a really poor reputation all the way up to dark green, which is excellent, which is 80 or higher. That measures essentially how a particular stakeholder feels about your organization. So it's that visceral feeling about you like them, you love them, you don't like them. The reason why that matters, and frankly, the only reason it matters, is because that score correlates statistically to, in those black boxes, a particular behavioral outcome for a particular stakeholder. It could be they purchase your product or pay more for it versus another alternative. It could be that they give you benefit of the doubt in a crisis. It could be that they choose to work for you, like Erica had talked about a little bit earlier, versus another company. And then that links to KPIs on the far right-hand side, like we've talked about. It could be stock price valuation. It could be market share growth. It could be revenue outcomes. It could be a number of different business outcomes that the C-level executive suite really care about. Okay, so think of those as the outcome of what you look at in those boxes sort of in the middle left-hand side, which we call the drivers. So those are categories. You can see that there are 7 there. And it runs from products and services perception to, is it a good place to work, to corporate conduct, to financial performance. Each of those categories, we call them drivers, has an importance. So relative to each other, which are more important in driving the outcomes you care about. And then each of those basically receive a score. So how are we doing? Are we delivering against the expectations of that stakeholder? Right? And once you know what matters most and how you're performing versus yourself as well as competitors, you can communicate through the channels on the left-hand side. And there are a number of channels. Catherine talked about a couple of those different channel types. It could be your paid media. It could be your earned media coverage. It could be your own communications, your own website, emails, etc. Or it could be the direct experience that a particular stakeholder has. So again, once you know on the far right-hand side, sort of at the bottom of the page, what outcomes you care about the most, and in that maturity model, Catherine gave you some examples, then you want to know how you're performing in terms of reputation, perception what drives those perceptions the most, and through what channels are most effective. So that's one way to think about quantifying something that has historically been pretty esoteric or squishy or unquantifiable, whatever you want to call it. That's one way to measure the way people think about you, which drives an outcome. The question is, why does it matter? Because it does matter. So if you look in the upper left-hand side, what you'll see is basically those outcomes on the far left. And based on what your reputation is, and remember, Catherine said the goal was to have a reputation of 60 or higher. And you can see here, basically, as you go left to right, if your reputation is in the poor range, and we all know companies that you think have a poor reputation, we won't name any of them here. But what it tells you is if your reputation is poor in our scale, below a 40, basically less than 1 out of 10 people would engage in the behavior that you care about. Right? So 8%, 7%, let's pick benefit of the doubt in a crisis. If your reputation is in the excellent range on the far right-hand side of that scale in the dark green, the willingness to support you goes up 10 times, right? From 7 or 8% to 70+%, for example, in benefit of the doubt. That's why reputation matters so much. We also know on the right-hand side that if your reputation starts out stronger, that it minimizes risk impacts. And Eric had talked about this, like minimizing risk scenarios. And even if you're in a risk scenario, if your reputation starts out stronger, you recover faster. And if you look on the bottom left-hand side, you'll see that you can correlate these things at a very tactical level to specific outcomes that the executive team cares about. And you can see a list here of things like reduced churn or market valuation or cross-sells or upsells, or even first meetings in a new business sort of acquisition stage. So yes, it matters, right? But number one, you have to be able to measure it in order to be able to move it. And it's not just with one stakeholder either. And I'm just going to have one other quick video with a woman, Kara Knox, who runs global communications for Edward Jones, which is a financial services organization in the Americas.
Reputation practice here at Edward Jones in 2018. And I think a couple things really stand out to me. One is you can't move what you can't measure. And second is reputation is multi-stakeholder. At Enterprise Communication, we sit within a division at Edward Jones called External Affairs, where we're thinking about our client, of course, at the very center of everything we do, but all of the concentric circles that surround our client, potential investors, prospective financial advisors, branch office administrators, other associates, policymakers, regulators. So I think critically, you need to understand what a very diverse group of people think, feel, and will do about your company. And with that insight, I think you're able to develop very specific communication strategies to close gaps and kind of move that needle farther, faster. But I think those two insights really stand out. You can't move what you can't measure, and reputation needs to be multi-stakeholder.
So the second thing that Kara talked about is the multi-stakeholder component of reputation management. And I think we could talk about multi-stakeholders all day. And Kara took you through a couple of examples of ones that she and her team think about. But I wanted to spend a minute talking to you about one of the biggest questions that we're getting from clients across the globe. And if you haven't gotten it yet, I guarantee you'll get it relatively soon. And that's the emergence of a brand new stakeholder. And that's the concept of AI as a stakeholder. Okay, so welcome to the world of AI. Catherine talked about it. It's changing everything. One of those is in the realm of content creation for the communications teams. That is not what we're talking about today. Okay, so what are we talking about? You can see a lot of words on this page, but I think a couple of key points to take away. What we're finding and what our clients are finding is that increasingly different stakeholders are using AI platforms themselves to source information about your company. Okay, so there's an increasing focus now among organizations to try and understand how those AI platforms are describing them. And as a result of this, we all know about search engine optimization. There's a new term that's emerging you've probably heard of called AI engine optimization, with the goal of being able to enable basically more positive narratives and messages when stakeholders go to AI platforms to learn about you. And the question there are three questions that we're getting from our clients. Number one is, are people using AI to learn about us and how much? That's question one. Question two is, if they are, how are the platforms describing us? And then third is, if it's good or bad. If it's good, not an issue. If it's not good, how do we optimize it more? Okay, so again, the aim here is not to go to the platform to say, what do policymakers think about us? It's if a policymaker goes to an AI platform and asks about us, what is the platform telling us? And that is really an interesting topic of discussion here. And I'm not going to show you this. You'll get a copy of this so you'll know kind of the process that we use. But the idea here is we took our core measurement framework that we use to ask stakeholders about you, and we asked the platforms about you. And you can see the second to the last bullet, the 5 AI platforms, ChatGPT, Grok, et cetera, et cetera. And then we basically asked them to create a score based on our measurement framework and compare them to other stakeholders and how they perceive you. So this scores that you see are an average of results across all the platforms. So we decided to use a particular company. The person that ran this on our side is based in Australia, and they picked a company most of you are familiar with, which is Qantas, right? The airline, which all the way back, as you can see here, sort of in 2018, 2019, was a highly reputable company. Their reputation, as you can see, was over 80, which is in the excellent range if you look at the dark green. And then starting in about 2021 and 2022, they started to have some reputational challenges. There was this perception of that they were placing profit over people, that they were not prioritizing quality of products and service, that they were not investing in their employees. And the result of that over time was they removed their CEO, they removed the chairman of the board, and their reputation, as you can see, went from the 80s to the 50s. That's not good. Okay, comparatively speaking, 50 is all the way down in the sort of the weak range, which means you have a whole lot of detractors and not a lot of promoters. So what we decided to do was use this as an example of a company and ask the AI platforms how they would basically review Qantas's reputation. And here's what we saw. So what you can see is the AI stakeholder and their scores of Qantas compared to the actual reputation measurement that we did with the informed population in Australia. And you're going to see two big problems, right? Number one is there's a whole lot of orange that you can see for AI as a stakeholder, and comparatively speaking, their reputation with AI platforms versus the gap that you see with IGP. And you can see the challenges, not only were they way lower, right? So AI was basically informing other people about Qantas in a way that was very, very negative, comparatively speaking. But you can even see where it was the most negative in things like corporate conduct here on the right-hand side, workplace perceptions, product perceptions, right? All the things you don't want people to get educated negatively about the organization is what the platforms were doing. The one place where it wasn't negative, financial performance here, where it was basically right on par and strong. So really good scores for financial performance, really bad scores and way worse than the way the real world thought about Qantas using the AI platforms. Now, the question is it always negative for all companies when you look at AI platforms? Because, right, they can only take the information that they have access to. And the answer for their number one competitor, which is Virgin in Australia, is the opposite. So Virgin's profile using the AI platforms, the way in which the platforms describe them, was actually more positive, right? Reputation was stronger, product perception was better, innovation perception was better, conduct perception was better. And in that case, if you are Virgin, you don't really have to worry about optimizing AI platforms because they actually describe you more positively than the general population perceive them to be, right? So you need to know the answer to the first and the second questions, which is, are people using the platform? And second, if they do, is it going to help you or hurt you? It actually helped Virgin. It hurt Qantas. We go at a much deeper level across all the different areas, and you can go into more detail here, and you'll have access to this in terms of perceptions at a more discrete level. But things like fairness here in the middle of the page, and how they do business, the ethical behavior, if we talk about ethisphere, open and transparent, all of those were dramatically worse than the way in which the existing live people were thinking about Qantas in this case. Excuse me. And then last but not least, if you look at behavioral outcomes, so things we talked about before, things like benefit of the doubt in a crisis or trust or recommend for an airline, all of those were significantly worse, right? So this is a key question that our clients are asking about AI, which is, are people using AI to learn about us? We actually track that in the measurement that we do, and we ask people whether they're using AI as an information gathering platform, as a channel, as a touch point. And the answer is increasingly yes. Second is, if they do, how are the platforms describing them to the stakeholders, which is really important because you need to know what our clients are asking us on the comms teams is, do I need to care about this or not? And if the answer is a lot of people are accessing it, and it's positive, maybe not. If it's negative, then at least you need to know the next step, which is how do we optimize it through what they're calling AI engine optimization, which is the new version of search engine optimization. So just a quick run through of one of those key topics, new stakeholder areas that our clients are asking about. And good luck, because the AI world's getting crazier and crazier these days. But this is a good way to think about the way in which comms teams are thinking about AI in the context of the way in which channels are educating stakeholders about you. So thank you for that. And Catherine, I'll turn it back to you.
You, Brad. That was great. Thank you. Now it's my privilege to introduce not only a reputable professional, but a bestie, Dr. Tina McCorkindale. She's president and CEO of the Institute for Public Relations, which is a nonprofit research think tank focused on advancing the public relations industry through research and promoting best practices. She is also the host of the internet program In a Car with IPR. Check that out on YouTube if you haven't already. It's tons of fun. And with that, Tina, take your time. We started late, so please.
Okay, yes. So that was my question. Is everyone leaves at the top of the hour, or?
Let's hope not. Let's hope they stick around.
Because I can always come back to another one if it's easier, because I think I have like 4 minutes on the clock.
No, go ahead and I'll do a tight wrap at the end. Take your time.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so I'll kind of go through this a little faster, just because of the time. So hi, everyone. I'm at the Institute for Public Relations. We're a nonprofit research foundation in public relations. We've been around since 1956. And what we do is we provide research and insights to the profession. We also have membership groups for mid to senior level leaders. We have a great board of trustees and all that fun stuff. So let me, I'm going to, I hope this is going to work. And you all tell me, can you see my screen in big?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I did okay. Very surprised at that. I'm used to having 2 screens. I'm in Dallas. I usually live in Seattle, so it's a little, you know how that goes. All right, so I feel like I don't need to go into this detail. We know that the language of CEOs is data. That's what they want to see. And I feel like both of the presenters set this up really nicely. They want to see, you know, how are we moving the needle on trust? How are we having ROI? And how do we quantify what is not quantifiable? So things I'm going to talk about, metrics that matter. And I was trying to decide the order of how this should be, but I think I'm going to start with the metrics and then move into some of the key areas that people care about. All right, so metrics that matter. So when we think about the overall landscape, that we have so many different stakeholders that we consider, starting from the employee at the base, moving to the function in which we are part of, how that matters to the organization, thinking about what our competitors and talking about what our competitors are doing, and also all the areas that impact the industry, what is happening in the industry, how do we compare ourselves to what we're doing to the overall industry, and then thinking about the whole sphere of business, society, media, communities, everything. However, what sometimes happens is, and you'll see this in a lot of companies, it wasn't necessarily what we saw in the presentation today because of how RepTrack has multiple areas that they think about. But if you ask companies, what they narrow down in is on that media analysis. And they'll say, this is what we're doing in social media. This is what we're doing in media relations. But the media relations landscape has changed dramatically. Now that we're focusing on LLMs, how do you get your content into LLMs? And it's not copy and paste on Google and it goes into LLMs. What we're also seeing, which is challenging, is now that Google and other popular search engines, which will most likely be replaced by things like Comment and people using searches on AI platforms, is that most people don't even click on a link anymore when they go to that first page of Google searches because of the AI summation that they're given. I think the stat was 85 to 87% are now just staying on what they read there. But this is what we see a lot, standard comms metrics, and then the dreaded AVE. And what we still see in AVE, people are still advertising that they give the AVE, and it creates the success theater with CEOs where you have these non-valid metrics that you try to aspire to, but they're made up on shaky foundations. And then you're having to do the success theater because what it's built on is not solid. So here's the other sort of thing thrown in now that with LLMs that we have a lot of bots we have to contend with. So people are primarily using social media analysis. There's a couple things that are issues with social media analysis that we need to consider. One is people who post on social media are not representative of the general population, right? I never disparage companies on social media because I can't in my position. There's a lot of people who don't say anything about their organization on social media or criticize it because that's their employer. So it's not necessarily representative. Is it useful? Absolutely. But here's something that we're also seeing. So Peak Metrics found that almost 45% of the chatter right after the new Cracker Barrel logo was bot driven, right? But then what happened and how it came to be is because we have this sort of created outrage and people share it. So while that was the case in the first 24 hours, it changes. And there's all sorts of issues in the landscape with short sellers, people trying to drive the stock price. And also you'll see where they'll start talking about, for example, against the Cracker Barrel logo, how we're moving against the sort of heritage. And then 48 hours later, they'll change and they'll flood with another system from people on the counter because that drives clicks, engagements, and keeps it in the discussion. So that's another issue we have to consider. But more important metrics and things that we talked about today is when you have KPIs that are directly tied to the business, that you're doing reputation tracking, not just externally with stakeholders, but also internally with your employees. And it has to be continuous real-time reputation tracking. Really, when we think about evaluation, it's not just to say, look at the great things we're doing. It's like, here's how we can do them better. And here's how we're anticipating some of the issues. The other thing is, this was actually, I'm at the Page conference in Dallas, and we were asking questions and talking about employee engagement. And, in groups, we say, how many of you are measuring employee engagement weekly? How many are doing it monthly? And it's interesting, or annually. Some people only measure engagement annually, or they only measure engagement quarterly. However, if you have a really great researcher, a strategic researcher on staff, you can measure engagement once a week, because if you have a large enough employee base, you can take a subset of your sample in different areas and just track over time, or like once every few weeks. And then you tie it to the business initiatives that you have, how employees are feeling, what is their morale, what is their retention, and you're a little more in tune with what your employees are thinking. You also don't have to give like 500 question surveys to employees, but you say, what's your awareness on initiatives that are the comms functions? And there could be one, or you can embed them into the programs themselves. Like, how did you hear about this? And put more like pop-up and interaction and whatever. The other thing is measuring like initiative awareness and behavior, both internal and externally, and then doing a lot of message testing, A/B testing, which what we do at IPR. The other thing is correlation is really key to what we do. And you can track like correlate metrics to employee engagement, stock price, internal policy and programs you're doing to engagement, both internally if you have consumer audience or internally with your employees. Now, one of the things with this that's really important is they'll say correlation does not equal causation, 100% true. But you can talk about how the strength of the relationship between these factors with a correlation, which is what a correlation does. And it's very informative. And you can take multiple dimensions and put that in there and see what's really driving the different trackers. Okay. So, and let's talk a little bit about employee engagement. I'll keep this very brief, but basically what we're seeing with challenges and in the research is that there's so many projects and initiatives happening in the organization that employees are feeling overwhelmed. And in a study we found, they said that they don't see tangible results of what they're doing on a daily basis. And then they feel like they're on some sort of roller coaster. We have added issues of polarization. And how do we create that stability? And part of that is making sure that outcomes, the results of the efforts are there. So Corn Ferry has a really great, and I'm happy, by the way, these slides, I've sent them to Catherine so she can share them, but there's all sorts of different ways to measure employee engagement and drivers. This is Corn Ferry's that we use. And then IPR did a study, and we're doing the second iteration of the study with the Grossman Group, and we determined 5 levers for what makes a engaged employee in communication. Because one of the reasons is we haven't really pulled out communication employees specifically, and we know that the nature of the business is very different. So I will let you all read these later because we're short on time. But I also wanted people to say, think creatively. This is a really hard graph to see because I took a picture of it when someone else was presenting, and you see my screen is a little blurry. But basically what it is when you're thinking about issues, how do you think about ways that you can measure creatively that are valid? So this is Corn Ferry. What they did is they took a physical representation of what their HR employees sit. And then they did different dimensions of automation potential within their employees. That way they can find out what division that is most going to be affected by automation. And then how do we get either of these people trained in different areas or what to do? So it's a very different way of thinking about it in a visual perspective, which is actually really helpful for CEOs. All right, trust. Okay, we're also in a trust gap, as you can see. So what this chart means, really quick explaining, is that business executives believe their consumers highly trust their organization. That is a 90% executives say we are highly trusted. Consumers say, I highly trust companies at 30%. So you can see we have a 60 percentage point gap on the overall trust that we have. Business executives are also overestimating how much their employees trust their employer as well. That is a smaller gap at 18 percentage points, but you can see why we have sort of challenges in what we think about and how we come together. Move this in with the trust gap in media, but in our annual research we do on disinformation, where we have the most coming together of a very politically divided culture is in local news. However, since 2005, we've seen a loss of 3,300 local newspapers, which creates what we call, and by the way, this isn't a US thing. It's happening in the UK, it's happening in Germany, it's happening in other places as well. It's more likely to happen than not, but it leads communities with news deserts. So where are they getting their information? What sources do they trust if the trusted sources are going away? In this case, in the US, it's a lot of conservative counties that will be without news. So then you turn to alternative sources. And then World Economic Forum had, here's a list of global risk ranked by severity. We're going to be very important to the business for the next 10 years at least, because a lot of these are PR issues and comms issues. Number one at the top is misinformation, disinformation. This is one of the big areas that IPR does research. So last, I will say, we have to be on top of the AI and how we can be beneficial. Catherine said, comms, like we have to be at the forefront, working with CISOs, the chief tech officer, everyone across the board to make sure that we're rolling out the functions how it needs to be rolled out. You can see in just a matter of 2 to 3 years how much the AI landscape has changed and the things that we can do. And according to Moore's law, this will only increase over time. And so here's the other interesting thing we all need to be aware about. So if we look at this McKinsey survey on the left side, it is estimating the C-suite. We're basically saying to the C-suite, asking the C-suite, what percentage of your employees are already using AI? And the C-suite said 4%. My employees are using, only 4% are already using it for more than 30% of their tasks. But then when we ask employees themselves if they're using it, that number is at 13%. And then we said a year from now, what do you think the use of employee AI will be for more than 30% of the task? C-suite says an additional 16%, and employees say 34%. So clearly the adoption is moving faster than we perceive it to be. And then here's what we think about what we need to consider and the tools that we need to do to make sure. Plus, there's all sorts of other issues with AI that we can go on about in a whole separate session. But these are all the data that is extremely important in how we move forward and talking to the C-suite and what they love. And then the last thing I'll say, and then I'm done, is this concept of work slop. And work slop is, there's a lot of great terms that have been come up from AI. There's also one called enshittification, which is basically how platforms, they'll be really shiny at the beginning, they'll degrade over time. But work slop is what's happening when people create content from AI and it's garbage. And then they take their little pile of garbage and then they pass it down to their other colleagues who then have to correct and fix the garbage. So it's creating all these issues downstream with the flow that they're going to have to correct and redo the work. And 40% of employees in a recent survey, Harvard Business Review is doing an ongoing study, have said they have received work slop in the past month. So as a communicator, how do I address the issue of work slop to make sure that our employees are well trained? Because it's clear that sometimes the C-suite isn't aware of the extent to which employees are using AI. So that is it for me. I can talk for years, but I won't. So thank you, Catherine and Maxim, for having me. Thank you all.
Thank you, Tina. Brilliant as always. I'm just going to wrap up really quickly here with what I will call a pro tip. And you guys look frozen, so I hope you can see and hear me. My pro tip for you is this. If you want to speak the language of your CEO, curate as much as you can what your CEO reads. What does that mean? CEOs like to know what other CEOs are doing. They like to talk to other CEOs. They like to benchmark against them. Alan Murray at Fortune has a newsletter. It comes out daily. You can get it for free in email. And you can make sure that your CEO gets it for free in email by curating it for them instead of just your own clippings. And it has usually an interview with the CEO about a hot topic that's very brief. And then 3 things CEOs should be reading. And it's links to other articles in other journals that are highly valuable to CEOs. I would suggest you get that into your CEO's feed and your C-suite feed and make sure you read it before they do first thing in the morning. And with that, I'll say thank you all so much. I know we went a little over time. We started a little bit late. I really appreciate everyone's time and attention. I want to thank Brad and Tina and Erica and Tim and Maxim and all of you for your time and attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Maxim had to go out in the last minutes, but I'm sure he will watch the recording a couple of times after. It was very interesting for everyone, and thank you for joining you specifically and organizing this amazing masterclass with 4 surprising guest speakers today. That's the first for our masterclass season. So thank you so much. And just a quiet reminder for everyone, the Voice Summit is coming in April. So we want to welcome you all, hopefully, and see you soon.